Hello, wonderful people, and welcome to Pop Culture Therapy. It's Advent Nebula.
And Cruellica Kain, how are you doing today?
It's one of those weeks.
Yeah, I thought it was never going to end because work just didn't stop.
Yeah. I won't go into detail, but if anybody knows where I work for and has seen the news, they know what's going on.
Yeah, I work for a space company, so everything's going on that could be bad.
Yeah. So, this one we're going to talk about, and we're going to kind of just go in no particular order. Like we said, there's not going to be a count. We're just going to go on about obscure horror movies that some people may not have heard of, or if they have, you guys are going to be going, really?
And it could be that you may know these films, and you'll be like, well, why are they considered obscure? The definition of obscure technically means something that not everyone is aware of. That even if it's a recent film, because I actually have a couple of films on here that were in the last few years, it's just that they were not marketed, nobody really thought about them, or nobody even really cared to check them out, even though they were great.
Or some of these just may have been lost to time because of when they were made. I mean, there's a couple that I know of that are from the early days of filmmaking that some people have just completely forgot.
Well, and then there are a few others that, well, the first one that I actually have listed, truthfully, in our modern culture, it would probably be kind of inappropriate just because with how easily people can be offended and things like that. And it's actually called Sleepaway Camp.
Yeah, this one, I'm kind of surprised that American Horror Story using it and Friday the 13th as its basis for its most recent season.
I know, I'm actually surprised. And the reason why I'm so surprised as well is because Sleepaway Camp in the current culture, let's just put it out there, is so insulting.
Yeah.
And it's... So, to give a basic premise, twins, well, kind of twins, kind of not, because they're not actually brother and sister, they're cousins, but they were raised as twins. They go to Sleepaway Camp. They're going there for a summer camp, kind of like most of those campy horror movies. And insanity breaks out. The girl gets bullied. Horribly bullied. And goes through the movie. She starts to develop a relationship with a young man who's very open, nice, kind. He wants to go to second base. She doesn't want to go to second base. You find out at the end, she is a he. And they do it in the most graphic way possible.
Yeah, and you're just there like, what?
And the actor, because it was a male actor throughout the entirety of the film, plays a woman so well, you would have... The facial features, the presentation, the standing positions, everything a woman naturally does that we may not even think about, he did so well that the audience would never have known.
Yeah.
And I know I'm spoiling the twist. The reason why I'm doing that, though, is because if that's something you're uncomfortable with because of the modern world, I would not seek out this film unless you will not be offended by its terrible connotations in 2019.
Yeah. I'm going to start out with something that we could talk about in December, but being a horror month, we're just going to talk about it anyway. Film came out in 2005, and it's a spin on Krampus, but instead of Krampus being the villain, it's Santa.
I love this movie.
And that's Santa Sleighs, where Santa's actually the son of Satan and punishes evil children and evil people in some of the most graphic but most hilarious ways possible.
Well, and I think the coolest thing about this damn movie is Santa is played by Goldberg. If you're a fan of wrestling, He was a huge wrestler around that time. And he's like bulky. He does not know how to act. But he just has fun with this movie. And the kills are what really are hilarious. Because he goes to one house for Christmas dinner. Everyone's dead by the time he leaves. But his way of killing everyone was just so gratuitous, but so funny.
Or the one that always sticks out in my head is the bully that gets impaled on the flagpole. I mean, we're talking Vlad the Impaler kind of impaling.
It is what I consider the most camp of campy horror movies. And to have it done in the 2000s, when camp was dead. Camp stopped, I would say probably around 92, 93. And didn't make a revival except for like cult type of B movies. Because they didn't think there was a market for it.
Yeah.
Obviously, Cabin in the Woods proved them wrong. But even then, that was so many years after Santa Sleighs. Santa Sleighs is... They had a very basic, I would say, cut and paste number plot. But it's done in such a fun way that you have no other choice but to enjoy it.
Yeah, and you're going into this movie and you know within the first 15 minutes this is going to be a comedy horror movie.
Oh, yes. So, another movie that I really love that I think of as obscure, and a lot of people think of it as obscure, even though there's a well-known market for it, is Nosferatu.
The original vampire movie of cinema.
The original OG vampire film. It took elements from Bram Stoker's book, but also took a lot of the Norwegian elements of what...
Not just Norwegian, but also pulled from Austrian.
Yes.
Because this film was from that era of Europe, post-World War I, because this film came out in 1922.
Yes, it's extremely old, but it's done so well.
The cinematography in this film holds up today. And it's still inspiring horror filmmakers across genres, because anybody that is in the horror genre that enjoys making movies pretty much says this is a standard for them to watch because of the cinematography. Not so much the story, but the cinematography and the way the creature effects are done, because the way the movements of Nosferatu is done, he moves around in a very unique way, and they didn't camera cut either. This actor actually was able to physically move in these weird positions.
And I think it was like about 5 or 6 years ago, or maybe a little bit longer, they did another movie that was on the background of filming Nosferatu. And they talked about all the elements, because something that they do today with certain films, kind of like It, is they will keep certain actors away from others, not for the method acting, but just so when they first see the creature makeup or the effects, it's authentic at that moment in time. There's no pre-planning for it. And Nosferatu, being that's from 1922, it's still in the era of silent film. So they have a scene, they will cut to a black screen with text, go back. I understand from kind of a modern feel, silent films are hard to get into.
Yeah.
Because you do not have any talking. All of the acting has to be done by their emotions, by their actions, by who they are on screen. And you get a very little bit of dialogue as context. But I would definitely check it out because it is beyond fantastic. And they did a modern cut with it, because the original music is still great with it, but they did a modern cut where the background music is all from Typo Negative.
Yeah, and then if you ever get a chance to see this movie, do it in an art house film theater, because most of the time they actually don't have any of the music playing. They bring in a live orchestra to film the score, just because nowadays it gives more of an authentic feel over there, and it gives you the interaction at the same time with the film that you wouldn't have.
It does, and it's such a beautifully done film. I love Bela Lugosi's Dracula, don't get me wrong, but Nosferatu is just so much more. It's what you exactly think of when you think of a vampire or vampire or anything like that.
My next obscure movie is one that Voltaire has actually written a song about. And that's Cemetery Man. So anybody who has heard the song Zombie Prostitute knows of this movie. It's about a man who goes to Italy, ends up meeting a beautiful woman that is a lady of the night, and it turns out her home is in an actual graveyard. And the movie it gets weirder and weirder as it goes along. But it's a kind of a thrill ride that you're not expecting to go along on. It's not a horror comedy, and it's a horror movie, but not in a lot of the vein you'd expect. And it's a Italian-American horror film at the same time. Rupert Everett just kind of sells the role as this guy who's kind of freaked out, but just ends up going along with everything as the story progresses.
So, the next movie I'm going to talk about, I'm actually going to talk about a Japanese film. And one thing I should kind of go back on in regards to this is in the 60s and 70s, Japanese horror movies took on this very psychedelic type element to it that I almost felt like when I was watching it a couple of years ago with Kaiju, and we still own it, and I love this movie, is you might as well be high when you're watching it, because
I know exactly what we're talking about, because the director of this movie went on to do the Scorpion films of Female Prisoner 701 right after this film, and a lot of the actresses that are in this movie correspond into those films.
Oh, yes. So this movie is called Hasu or House, and it's kind of as you would think. It's a haunted house film where a bunch of young Japanese girls go to a family, their aunt's house. And I am not going to spoil this. I am not going to go into the plot based on those couple of elements, only because for two things. One, this horror movie plays with you. So even if you try to explain it, you would not explain it correctly.
Yeah, you really can't explain this movie without spoiling it, and at the same time, you're wondering what the hell did you just watch every time you watch it.
Exactly. I have seen this movie 5 times, and I have gotten 5 different reactions of how I have watched this movie, because it has not done the same thing twice in my mind.
Yeah.
So I really recommend it. It's from the late 70s, but it does have that psychedelic horror feel, which I didn't even think of could be a genre until that point. But it really does play in the supernatural-esque genre.
I'm going next, and it's staying in Japan, with a horror movie that was inspired by House, but starts off the film with 25 girls jumping in front of a train.
Oh, God!
Suicide Circle. Which some people are like, how? You're going, is that really a horror movie? Oh, yes, it is. It plays with your mind as you're going through with the protagonist, and then it also branches off into with another character in Noriko's Dinner Table, which I also rank high with that. But the two films are so different from each other, because Suicide Circle is more of a horror movie, where Noriko's Dinner Table is kind of a suspense film. But with Suicide Circle, when you're going through the main characters of the sister and the brother, before the sister goes off on their own story, which you have to see Noriko's Dinner Table with, the brother and his friend on when they're trying to figure out what happened with the girls, just goes on to this wild, trippy-ass ride that when you get to the climax of the movie, you're wondering, where the hell is this going?
Oh, God. When I first watched that movie, I'm like, what the hell did I just watch? Because you have the mother who's cooking, cutting up a carrot, but not cutting up the carrot any longer. I was like, stop! It actually made me afraid of, like, being conscientious of what I'm cutting up. And it's all based on well, at least where I took from it, it's based on this pop group.
Yep.
And those little pop singers, they're devils.
Yeah, it plays with a lot of your expectations,
Yeah.
and then flips it on the head when you actually get to the end with the main antagonist of this film, and I'm going to say antagonist in quotation marks because he's kind of set up everything, but at the same time, you're also wondering if it was all pre-planned by these people at the same time.
Oh yeah, it really harkens to torture porn, which I didn't think the Japanese could do, but they basically said, "Oh, Eli Roth, you want to do torture porn? That's so adorable. Let's show you what we can do."
Yeah, and this movie came out in the mid-2000s, right around the same time as Hostel.
And Saw and all of that. So I'm going to do one more. I'm going to say Japanese, mainly because of the director, but it's kind of an American movie because it has the Prince of Horror. Because I think of Stephen King as the King of Horror. I think of Clive Barker as the Prince of Horror.
And this is based on one of his most popular short stories.
And the director, who has proven he can do horror, because this director has done so much. One of my favorite films of his is Versus. His name is Ryuhei Kitamura. You probably know him from Final Wars for Godzilla. But he did a movie called Midnight Meat Train, which is based off of a Clive Barker story, which I've read the story. So when I read the story and then finally saw the movie, I was like, wow.
Yeah, Clive Barker actually wrote the screenplay for this movie.
With Jeff Bueller.
Yep, and they ended up picking the director, they handpicked the director themselves, because they felt only a Japanese director could actually bring this movie to life.
And this particular film, the one thing I love about it is you do have that Japanese horror feel to it. Even though it's an American-made movie, I would say he really brought the Japanese elements to it authentically. Plus, it has such a great acting cast. It has Bradley Cooper, has Vinnie Jones, so many other people who really committed to how they're going to do these characters, how they're going to go and put the story together, because it is not a progressive story. It's a progressive story, but it really plays with how you look at a killer, how you look at a monster, how you look at how people are going to die. How do you look at what you see through a lens versus what you see through reality?
Yep. I'm next going to go with a Guillermo del Toro film where, as the directors progressed through the years, especially with Hellboy and The Shape of Water, this is kind of one of his early, and this is maybe either his first or his second movie he ever did in English. And it's a creature feature horror. It tends to get lost. Just imagine human-sized cockroaches in Chicago. Mimic.
I hate this movie. No, it's a good movie. Don't get me wrong. I don't hate this because it's a bad movie. I hate it because
the thought of human-sized cockroaches eating people.
It's always been one of those that I've seen a few times. I've just not.
Yeah, it's for somebody like Cruellica here who hates cockroaches. I can see where this movie creeps her the hell out, but it's an original take. Who would have thought the idea of human-sized sewer-dwelling cockroaches could evolve and then start actually mimicking people because we have become their food source?
Oh, God. Yeah, mimic. Yeah. I'm not even going to talk about it.
Yeah, I can see why. You just grosses you out.
Yeah, it's like I can watch Arachnophobia every single day of the week. Give me mimic? No. It's kind of like watching Joe's Apartment. Oh, no.
Yeah, that's a movie I find absolutely hilarious.
Oh, no, it's a great stoner comedy. I just don't want to be in Joe's Apartment. So, my next movie is actually a modern film. It came out, I would say, about a year or two ago. It's on Netflix. And basically, take devil worshipping, take babysitting, and put them together. I would have never, ever, ever watched this movie. And I actually sold it to Chrysalige Bloodborne after I watched it because it was hilarious. It's called The Babysitter. And no notable actors or actresses in it, even though I think every single person who was in the movie did a fantastic job. It's basically this young boy who really should not have a babysitter anymore. He's like 12 years old, but I guess in modern age that would probably be inappropriate to not have a babysitter. So he's bullied by one of his neighbors. Plus he has another neighbor he's friends with who's a girl that he has a crush on. Well, he has this babysitter who is like the pinnacle of like hot chick. Basically, think of like Clueless type level hot, preppy, but has the mouth of a sailor. And she babysits him. Well, she puts him to bed. They decide to have a devil worshipping experience with her friend, with a bunch of her friends who are all cliche horror movie stereotypes. This director takes in every single cliche that you could have for a horror and says, you know what? We're going to own it. Has the token black kid. Has the token cheerleader. Has the token Jew type kid. Has the token goth chick. Has the token jock. Every token type stereotype you can have for a horror movie, they have them all throughout the movie. And how they handle all of it is so perfect. Because they have the Asian girl as well. And everyone, when they go through the process, even the black kid's like, no, I'm not going. I've seen horror movies. I am not dying first. And sends the Jewish kid in to die first. Everything that they could do plays with your head. And I love it because it's like, you know what? We're going to take every single trope, put it in this movie, and we're going to play with them.
Yeah, they really do a good job with it on it. I saw the movie only like once.
Oh, I watch it like every few weeks or so.
Yeah, it is an interesting one, to say the least. Now, I'm going to go with a really obscure film that's from John Carpenter. Came out in the 90s, but it's a twist on vampires you really wouldn't see, and they actually titled it John Carpenter's Vampires.
I know, so original.
Yeah, I know, so original, but it's a horror action movie that a lot of people just don't give credit for a lot of the time. And John Carpenter's name at a time was a cash grab, but this film is one of those where it's just like, it took a twist on the vampire genre, especially because a lot of the vampires are not weak to sunlight in this film, and took the blood-sucking aspect of it. But there's a few twists in the film that I don't want to spoil here, because I think everybody should actually give this one a shot and not listen to what the critics said, because it got tore apart when it came out.
Oh, yeah, no, it really did. And it's a good horror movie. And it's actually a well-written story, so I never understood why it didn't get the love. So the next horror movie that I have always found to be a little obscure, because nobody talks about it anymore, is Pumpkinhead. This is a movie from the 80s that kind of tried to stay a little bit away from the campiness of it, but tried to have the serious element, which is why I think it went to the obscure cult realm versus being more of the commonplace film, because of the fact that it tried to be serious. And it does such a great job with it. Pumpkinhead, basically, it's in a small little nowhere town where they have a lot of, I guess, urban legends, so to speak. And this one guy, his child is killed, and so he takes on this burden of calling in the Pumpkinhead, who is this evil creature that will take revenge at the cost of your own life. And after he starts harnessing the power of Pumpkinhead, he starts having second thoughts, like, okay, maybe this is a mistake, not everyone's supposed to die. But how do you, in a horror movie, go up against something that you let loose?
Yeah.
And it's a good movie. It's a great movie. There are sequels to it. I don't recommend the sequels. But it's such a fantastic film just because it really tries to do something different. in a period of horror in the 80s that everything was so sane.
Yes. I'm going to go harken back to the 1940s. Now, this is a horror movie that you can actually watch on YouTube. It's in public domain now, but it's a very inspirational horror movie. But I think a lot of people get lost in the fact of it's got a reputation that of being what it is, but it started out as a radio show that got adapted into a movie, Cat People.
Oh, yes, that's on my list as well. I love Cat People.
I mean, it's what pretty much is credited for having the jump scares start in horror movies. But this is one that I think everybody needs to actually take the chance. It's not that long of a movie. It's about 93 minutes. And with it now being available in public domain and it's on YouTube for free.
And Criterion actually did a nice little restoration of it as well. Because we have the Criterion version here at home.
It is one of those that everybody should see. And what's really great about this movie, every actor they cast in this movie was somebody they brought off the street. So no actor in this movie had any prior acting experience before doing this film version adaptation. Where if you listen to the radio dramas of this, you have some very well-known radio drama personalities from the era.
Another film I would like to go that's obscure, that I find so fascinating, it's actually a French film. And this one, I would say, is very similar to kind of like House on Haunted Hill. Not the same as House on Haunted Hill because it's a very, very different take. But it has that betrayal on top of betrayal on top of betrayal. And it plays with insanity. And it plays with what you think is going on. The film is called Le Diabolic.
Criterion put a great version of this film out a few years ago.
It did, and I love watching this version. So this is a psychological horror thriller where you have a wife and a mistress trying to get back at the husband. But you have everything else in the background going on at the exact same time, because this is all happening at a boarding school. And so you have a very isolated area. It has where you think you've taken care of this. You then have paranoia. You then have suspicion. You then have everything else that can play upon you. Because you have this trust between two women. Or do you? You have this trust between two other characters. But do you? You have so many things going on that you actually really don't know until you get to the end of the movie what is actually going on. It's a beautiful story. It was done in 1955. It's based off a book. And it basically is translated to The Devil or the Fiends. And the book it's based off of She Who Was No More. And it's such a beautiful story, and you actually feel so bad for the main protagonist because she thinks she's going insane from start to finish. And one really funny thing about this particular film is Alfred Hitchcock wanted to do it, but got blocked because the actual director is like, nope, I'm doing it. I'm beating you to it. So instead of having a very British take to it with Hitchcock at that time, because he was still doing a lot of films in England versus the United States, well, he was starting to move to the United States, you now have that film.
So my next one is one that, when it came out at its time, it got packaged with King Kong. It's only a 62-minute movie. It's based on a short story, and the short story shares the same name. It's called The Most Dangerous Game. Basically, the best way to describe this movie is what happens when you get shipwrecked on an island with an insane rich person who has run out of fun hunting normal animals and decides to hunt a person who is a career hunter that he intentionally shipwrecked on his island. And this is a story that's been played up time and time again, but the original story of this holds up today extremely well. And this movie was made pre-code of the film industry, and was one of the reasons why, along with Murders in the Rue Morgue and a few other films that came out at the time, why the film code ended up in its creation by the Catholic Church at the time.
Yeah, I think I remember this movie. I don't think I've seen it before, but I've heard of it. And from what I heard, it was such a beautiful film, and it really did a creative take on everything it put together.
And the topic of what rich people will get away with is something they did back then, and we still have today, especially with some of the horror movies that we're seeing get made now that are circling around the hyper-wealthy.
So the next film I have is actually something that was banned in England for many, many years, even though this is where it took place. And it's called The Island of Lost Souls.
Another movie that was made the pre-code that is a very, very weird movie.
This was done in 1932 during the early days of what they call talkies. They're standard films these days, but it is about a mad scientist who is experimenting with animals and humanity. And it really is the question of how far you can go to create something. What is the separation of man and God? Are we allowed to take that next step to become gods ourselves? Or are we just going crazy, so to speak? Bela Lugosi plays the main character of Dr. Moreau, and now there have been other movies similar to this because it's actually based on the book Island of Dr. Moreau.
This was the very first version of it to actually be adapted to film.
Yes, and it has such an excellent cast of just actors and actresses that you would have never anticipated having in a film. And what they do vivisection, which, if you ever find out what that is, it's so beyond disturbing. They don't do it in a gratuitous manner, but they do enough to make you feel physically ill of what's going on, because you have two characters, a man and a woman. The man is a regular person and the woman is something else. And they start to fall in love. So it also asks the question, what is right and wrong within those types of relationships? Can we look beyond what a person is and be okay with it?
I'm going next with, this one is a controversial one. That people have heard the title, but not many people have seen it because of the reputation it has. That's Antichrist.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one, and people are like, well, how's that obscure? Well, like I said, not a lot of people have seen it because of its reputation. And it is living up to its expectation, but it's controversial only for one specific scene, and that's with a human getting skinned alive in front of the Virgin Mary. Mm. But the whole rest of the film is a lead up to this one event. That it's a suspenseful, very messed up horror movie, but I think is worth a watch because the director, Lars Vertargen, is known for putting together some very controversial ideas, but he makes it so you're thinking about topics that you really probably wouldn't even come across in your everyday life.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And Antichrist, I've only seen the movie once. And it was such a crap quality because when I watched it, it wasn't even released on DVD yet. It was on VHS still. And it was recorded VHS because the problem with a movie like this is it really does have a lot of stigma and censorship and
the actual America did not get the uncut version of this film until 2014.
It is, and even then it's very limited release, and it's hard to say if you'll ever see it because you have to search for it. It's not something that's going to be easily found. Yes, you can find it on Amazon, things like that. But even then, it's pretty difficult.
Yeah, and Lars Vartargan is, being a Italian director, he has made some really messed up movies that you just aren't going to expect to see. And when the ones that actually do come to the stateside, they're on very limited release because they are controversial, and that's why they have been stuck in either infamy or obscurity.
Another movie, I'm going to go kind of modern, and this actually does have a remake. The reason why I like the original so much more, and it is obscure because even with the remake, people really haven't heard of it. The movie I'm referencing is called A Tale of Two Sisters. It's a Korean horror film, and the one thing I will say, if there's any nation that does not pull any punches when it comes to horror movies, we could say all we want about Japan. We could say all we want about Sweden.
Thailand doesn't even match up to this
Thailand. No. Indonesia doesn't. America doesn't. Nobody reaches the level of South Korean horror.
Yeah, Old Boy should kind of give you an idea, and that's just tip of the iceberg on some of the messed up stuff Korea will put in their films.
And Korea, they do it in such a way that you have no clue what is going on. For Tale of Two Sisters, I've seen this movie 3 times. I've seen the remake. And say I've only seen it 3 times does not mean it's not a great movie. It's just, it's one of those obscure horror movies that you have to be comfortable with abuse, with mental health, with elements of, I would say, cannibalism.
There's implied incest in this movie.
Oh, yes, there's incest. There is everything disturbing. Plus, you can play around with thinking of it as like Cinderella.
Yeah.
Because you have the evil stepmother. Or is she evil? Or is the dad bad? Or is the actual birth mother actually there haunting everyone? You do not know. And even when you finish the movie, you do not know if you're for sure seeing the actual clear end of the story. Tale of Two Sisters was a fantastic film that is inspired by historical elements of South Korea or Korean culture, which I think is fascinating because it puts a lot of fairy tales together. And the American adaptation is called We Are What We Are. And they go, and the We Are What We Are go on a little bit more of a dramatic, because they take all the elements of Tale of Two Sisters and add more to it. But Tale of Two Sisters is a fantastic movie, and it really uses cinematography very well, because you have to play around having twin sisters everywhere. And then you have to refilm certain scenes where you think there's supposed to be multiple people in the room. Then you look at the same scene again, there is not. And the fact that they had to do this and do it where it made sense is amazing.
My next film is going to go back to Sweden, but this is what Sweden's credit is the Let the Right One In, being the first true vampire movie Sweden ever done. A few years later, they made a horror comedy that was kind of a take on 30 Days a Night in the aspect of vampires above the Arctic Circle and Frostbitten. Now this one is a pretty campy horror movie. I can't say anything else like that because it's playing on the trope, but at the same time, it does have some good suspense to it, but be prepared, you are going to laugh because it is very, very low budget.
What movie?
Frostbitten.
I have not seen that. Frostbitten. All I think of is, oh my god, there are so many Frostbitten movies. Because you have Nazis on ice. I know that's not the name of it.
You have Dead Snow.
Dead Snow, yes, with the Nazis.
But yeah, Sweden made their second ever vampire movie was Frostbitten, and it's a horror comedy.
I'll actually have to check that one out. I have never heard of it or seen it before. That's why I was asking you to repeat the name, because I'm like, I know he said the name, but I was like, did he say the name? Because that just sounds ridiculous. Because being that I have, they're not Swedish, but family in that area now, through my in-laws, not Kaiji no Kami, other side of the family, but they're not known for comedy. They're not happy. They're serious people. And if you're Swedish, I'm not trying to insult you, but every Swedish person I've ever met in my life is super serious. So maybe I'm just stereotyping based on just a small population, but they always seem serious to me. So I'm going to have to check this out.
Yeah, I ended up watching it with Cruellica Bloodborne, I think it was like 2007, because the movie came out in 2006. It didn't hit the U.S. till 2007. It's a short movie, too. It's only like 96 minutes.
I am definitely going to have to check that out. So, my next obscure movie is, I consider it popcorn horror. The reason I consider it like that is because it is so campy that all you're going to do is just eat popcorn the entire time you're watching it.
Now, I got to ask on this one, is it the original? Is it the one of the 2 remakes? Or is it all of them?
I do not count the remakes. They are not... They could be worse. But no, this is the one with the OG Steve McQueen. It's called The Blob from 1958. This is so... the music is so campy. The style of it is so campy. The ridiculousness of it is so campy. And Steve McQueen, who was in his late 30s, is playing a young man, which was ridiculous because it's so campy. He's playing like just out of high school, like early 20s maybe, and he's like nearly 40 years old, which, hey, he looked good at 38 when he did this movie. But this movie, The Blob, basically is what happens when Venom, so to speak, or the symbiote, is stuck to a meteorite that hits this small little weird town and starts eating everything up. It doesn't possess anyone, it just eats them and becomes so aggressive and so big it becomes the size of a building. And how do you beat it? In the most ridiculous manner possible, because they try to do horror. They try to do some seriousness with it, which just plays off as silly the entire time.
Yes. And speaking of silly, but also on the aspect of, have any of you ever seen a horror movie mixed with a musical? And Paris Hilton is an actual actress in the film.
I know, and she actually does a good job.
Yeah. Repo the Genetic Opera. Both of us love this movie.
I still listen to this soundtrack. Even if I don't watch the movie all the time, I still have the songs in my head.
And it's just one of those where it's like, you look at the cast, outside of the narrator who's the gravekeeper, it's all well-known actors just having fun adapting a horror story into the musical genre.
And it has its metal cred, because all the music is done by actual musicians. Well, they're all musicians for any movie, but these are also regular metal bands.
Yeah, and Terrence Eldritch had the metal bands come in and compose this one, and then metal bands composed and wrote the lyrics for the songs when he did the stage production of his play. Hired Darren Lynn Bozeman as the director, who is very well versed in doing musicals, and then had the actors sing the actual songs of these, which actually led them later on when they went to do the Devil's Carnival, get the friends that helped them make the Repo the Genetic Opera come in and actually star in the film and sing those songs.
And because they were doing an opera, one of the characters whose name is Blind Mag, Sarah Brightman, is an actual opera singer. So they also brought in metal opera, which I never thought was a possibility, but it was so awesome. And then you also have Alexa Vega, who was in the
Spy Kids
movies. That's the only time I had seen her, and she was like this cute little kid that was like, oh, adorable. You're in Rodriguez movies with Danny Trejo and Cheech Marin, and you're in this happy-go-lucky family film, and now you're an adult? I was like, wow, okay.
And then her father is played by a wonderful actor who, anybody who's seen Buffy is like, wow, this is a role twist for him.
Mm-hmm. No, everyone does good, and like we said, Paris Hilton is in the movie, which really surprised me because Paris Hilton, you can say, yes, she can sing because she released an album. I know she can carry a tune. Does not mean she can sing well, but she can carry a tune. Here she actually proved that she can do, because she played herself essentially.
Yeah, considering it was just, she was the spoiled rich daughter of a spoiled rich family.
Exactly. So, my next movie is, I'm just going to put it like this. Everything Hammer Films.
Yeah. Toxic Avenger.
Everything Hammer Films. Dracula, Frankenstein, The Wolfman, Toxic Avengers. The reason I put it like that is because in the 50s and 60s, Hammer Films decided that, first and foremost, they were going to reinvent the Universal horror movies. So they did all the Dracula films, they did all Frankenstein, and I put it like that because depending on the person, you may not have ever seen these films. You should know who is like the king of all the actors in these films,
yeah.
Christopher Lee, because he's been around forever. He sadly passed away a few years ago, but he was like the reborn godfather of horror movies.
Yeah. They did the classic, and then they went on to do some of the campy 80s stuff with Toxic Avenger, morphed into Trauma films, which is where James Gunn got his start before Trauma finally folded in the late 90s. But there's a historical legacy of Trauma. It's Trauma and Hammer both.
And yes, you could say they did non-horror films, but I really just look at them for the horror. Because they did Paranoid, Maniac, which Maniac is a fantastic horror movie that's very campy. They did Fear in the Night. They have done so many movies. They actually also, Hammer Films is responsible for Let Me In.
Yeah.
And The Woman in Black. And The Lodge. And so many other films.
Yep.
So, I figured I would just put them out there as
Hammer, you gotta go with all together, especially with the Trauma offshoot that folded eventually. But Hammer's still putting out some good films today.
Yes.
Speaking of Hammer Films, a cult movie from Canada that they just released didn't make, but if you ever thought redheads were evil, this movie will tell you they are, and that's Ginger Snaps.
I love this series. I have seen every single Ginger Snaps movies, and funny story, when I was going to visit my parents in Tucson, we went to this used bookstore. It's called Bookman's. And there were these two girls, they're like, oh, we want to have a movie night in, kind of make it romantic, but we want to do horror movies. And I was like, going around looking, and I was trying to mind my own business, but me being me, that never happened. I was like, have you ever seen the Ginger Snaps series? And they're like, what? I was like, Ginger Snaps. So they had the DVDs there, because not all of them have made it to Blu-ray, and if they have, I haven't found them.
I have only seen the first one on Blu-ray. I have not seen the other three on Blu-ray at all.
And so I gave them to them, and they're like, oh my god, these look awesome. I was like, they're great. And Ginger really does snap.
Yeah. And it's one of those, like, it's like me. I like my redheads. I just gotta remember, if the one does snap, like in the Ginger Snaps movie, I'm probably a dead man.
Yeah. So, my next horror movie, sadly, it was never released on its own. And I'm trying to find out the film it was put with. And and I'll have to get back to you on the movie. It's on a Criterion set. It's actually a double feature for Alfred Hitchcock. And the reason I say that is because it's called The Lodger. It's a silent film done in 1927 by Alfred Hitchcock. And it is a short little horror film about what's the most notable thing that you can think of with England.
God, there's so much I could think of, though.
Jack the Ripper. It plays upon, in a silent film way, every single thing of Jack the Ripper, of what you can think of when you think of this villain. How does he appear? How does he come out? Is he just an evil villain? Is he not? And it's all about the paranoia of that period with Jack the Ripper. And it's all silent film. It is completely restored. And the main character, Ivor Novello, does such a great job as the lodger. You don't know if he's evil. You don't know if he's not. Because the way he acted in this part and the way that Hitchcock directed him, you do not know what's going on. And actually, it was just released on its own. I thought it was a part of it. Yeah. But it's called The Lodger by Alfred Hitchcock. I would definitely recommend it as a great horror film by one of the greatest horror directors of our time.
Yeah. So, going into my final pick, I'm going to one that a lot of people don't associate Ian McKellen with horror. And this is a movie about Nazis, the Holocaust, and junior high all into one. Apt Pupil.
Oh my God, I would have never thought about this movie.
Yeah, this is a hard movie to watch, but at the same time, it is a really good horror movie. It's one that a lot of people don't give it the credit for because of the subject matter. And this is based on a Stephen King novella, and it's one that I wouldn't be surprised if they attempt to remake here soon, just because the subject matter is kind of becoming relevant again today.
It is, and I have only seen this movie once, but it was done so well. How I look at it is it takes its time to build it up. Kind of like what Stephen King is known for, even with its novellas. It's not completely always in your face. It really plays around with how you handle, especially in the 80s, when you have...
the 80s, this was 98.
The story takes place in the 80s.
Yeah.
But because I actually lived something similar to this, where, well, not similar to this, because this is crazy, but there were a couple of my neighbors that were German. And even in the 80s, we're 40 years past World War II. But people had very high levels of discomfort for my neighbors because of the fact that they were German. He was former military, but we don't know, was he a Nazi?
Yeah, and
was he part of some other division?
And Ian McKellen, the build-up, and you pretty are hinted very early on that Ian McKellen's character in this movie, he was a general in the SS. And the disturbing way of him grooming this young man that's just a junior high student into these beliefs gets really, really dark and disturbing.
Well, and that's what makes for a great horror movie as well. You can have horror movies that have slash and gore. You can have a horror movie that has camp and comedy. But another beautiful thing about horror movies, especially the obscure ones, is when you actually play around with the psychological elements of it. How does it relate to relevancy? You're not creating a neo-Nazi. You're not creating a KKK or a Sons of the Legion or any of that. You're creating a character, or you're creating a new type of evil.
Yeah, that's the whole story is about. Creating an evil in your image is what the whole story is about. And it is a dark story, but I think one that is getting relevant again today, because I just watched it again the other day and I was like, wow, it's kind of scary how relevant this movie has become again.
The last one I watched, or the last one I'll talk about real quick, is actually one I just watched this morning, Candyman. Candyman.
Tony
Todd is my spirit animal. He is such a great actor, an underrated actor, in my opinion, because he has done so much. And yes, he gets the love that he needs from his fans, but I think he could have done so much more that he was never given the opportunity to. The great thing about Candyman is it plays on the elements of urban legends, of religion, so to speak, of racism, of cultural and economic disparities. And I know I'm putting a lot on its shoulders, but it does. The element of Candyman was created because these racial xenophobics decided, since this black man loved this white woman, we're going to kill him in the most debaucheristic type manner ever. He comes back. Kind of like the whole Bloody Mary thing. You say his name in the mirror 5 times and he comes for you. And it plays so many different elements because you have to look at cultural disparity, because even the one character early on in the movie, she is a sweet mom who is working hard to take care of her son. She meets the main character who's this older white woman. She has hesitancy towards her even in the 80s, saying, I'm sorry, not too many white people come in this neighborhood trying to be nice to us. It really plays upon so much, but it also does a fantastic job with horror because it does not pull punches.
Yeah, every insect is in this movie was a real insect. The neat thing, trivia on this, why it's in this movie, Tony Todd actually had in his contract, he could get paid $1,000 for every bee sting he got while filming this movie.
And it's, once again, something our favorites, Prince of Horror, did, Clive Barker.
Yes.
If not for him, we would have not had this story either. So that's all I think we have right now for our obscure horror. So thank you again, and we will be back talking about some more horror stuff. I think we are
actually going to go into depth on what, and we've done a panel on this before in the past, but we're just going to kind of simplify and break it down to what we have as the 8 core aspects of American horror.
Yes, we're not going to go into foreign because then we'd have to branch off too much and there's so much diversity between them. We want to keep it where it's kind of going into our roots as being Americans.
Yes, they're just basically a breakdown of 8 pretty much standard genres of horror that America has. And it started way along up until we got our most recent genre in the early 2000s.
I know, yeah, no. Our most recent genre is the one I want to punch in the face the most. But with that said, we will see you soon. Bye!